Hi, my name's Noah, and I'm not one for intros. The purpose of this video is to explain what I've done to the project car so far, to explain why, and to also showcase what's next. To make a long story short, my dad and I have been huge fans of the automotive scene and racing history. After going to several car shows and meets over the years, we decided that we were going to bring a car to the next car show that we were going to attend. Organizing a project like this is usually a daunting task, but even when we narrowed down the list of cars we could potentially modify, this quickly became an expensive expenditure, as any manual, rear-wheel drive, or somewhat lightweight vehicle would be pretty pricey and even in some cases, not even running. Before this project got to where it was at, my dad was going to get rid of a 2004 BMW 325i. It was quite tired after a nice garage-kept 239,000 miles and had a hefty quote from BMW for all its problems from recent years. So, in my spare time, I brought the car back to life and remedied the slew of festive-looking warnings on the dash. Although this was quite fun to bring this car back up to speed and drive around, my dad and I decided this just wasn't enough, as this car was still quite boring. So it was decided that the funds that were going to be used to start a project car from scratch were going to be utilized to modify this BMW into something much better than what we started with. The first engine swap idea was to get an S54 with some nice ITBs, cams, other valve train stuff, a CSL tune, and then that was supposed to be that. But as the parts list filled, we found that the overall price was getting pretty close to exploring other engine options. An S54 would have been nice as to keep a BMW engine in a BMW, but it just seemed like so much work for not a lot of performance return. It was an unfortunate realization when everything was put into perspective. It would have been faster than its OEM state, but no matter what, this car would end up slower than a Z4M if we were to go with this engine platform. So to try and keep some semblance of BMW and the arguably cooler era of motorsports and engineering, it was decided to swap a unique engine of some kind into this four-door chassis. Since this car wasn't going to be driven like a daily driver anymore, some sacrifices in drivability and maintenance could be made. Options like a much more aggressive valve train setup, higher compression, and other performance considerations could be made, as this car was going to see much less miles over time. Replacing the oil more and looking at the lash every once in a while was going to be an important consideration to take into account with a more aggressive setup, as this is the important trade-off in something tailored to higher performance. When wanting something unique, the availability of parts comes into question immediately for modifications and repairs. This can become a problem when the accessibility of parts are rare within a particular platform or engine swap. This meant we needed to choose an engine that has a wide quantity of OEM and aftermarket parts available in the automotive market. My dad and I have always been huge fans of not only the automotive scene in general, but all eras and facets of racing and motorsports history as well. More notably, the 2000s touring car era of racing was filled with wonderful examples of functional, yet tastefully engineered race cars. This era and the one before hold some of the coolest looking production race cars I've ever seen. The engines that appeared throughout these eras were high-strung, naturally aspirated inline 4s, 6s, V6s, and V8s. The powertrains used in BTCC, DTM, and other similar series always featured some racing-oriented parts like individual throttle bodies, stacked injection, titanium, magnesium rods, high compression, and a variety of ultralight valve train parts. Although some of these engines had valve springs that could only last for hundreds of miles, and maintenance intervals were in the number of hours, I wanted to try and find an engine that I could swap that could build off of this idea. Let's say in theory, the BMW engineers were tasked with building a different, higher performance trim of the E46 four-door for a race or touring car series of some kind. Kind of like the CSL, we really like the idea of making this car a four-door M3 or track car of sorts. This car drives great from the factory and drove a bit better with the ZHP bits from BMW. I'm hoping the end result of this project will resonate with some of these motorsport ideals while not impeding too much on drivability. The S65 and S85 are quad overhead cam engines from BMW's earlier series of M sedans. These engines somewhat derived the idea of turning this car into an E46 M5 or four-door M3 of sorts. I like this idea, but modifying either of these engines got very expensive very quickly. A set of different camshafts and solid lifters for this engine is over $3,000 alone. Modifying or performing any maintenance on this engine didn't look too fun either due to the size of the heads not providing much clearance in the engine bay. Checking the lash or replacing other wear components on something like this would be somewhat difficult as well. The JZ engine series was one of the main reasons I got into motorsports. Seeing Ryan Turek's 1J Swap 240SX in his off-seasons video was really awesome to see circle the web at the time it came out. Since then, this engine series has been heavily featured in drifting and many other motorsports as a dependable platform for not only competition, but also the many swaps and builds around the world. It has cultivated a large market of parts and communities that cater to the fans and consumers of these engines. Although this engine has a wealth of parts available in the automotive market, this platform quickly became exempt from the list as it wouldn't be right to remove a turbo from a 1J or 2J in this instance. If a JZ series was going to end up in this chassis, it was going to have forced induction to go along with it. The naturally aspirated version of this engine could suffice, but we wanted a little bit more power than what just a ported GE head, a cam, and some ITBs could produce at the end of the day. A single turbo 2JZ would have been a wonderful choice for a Pro-Am drift or track car, but I'm not competing anytime soon or shooting for any crazy dyno numbers. The RB26 next to the 2JZ and S54 is one of my favorite inline sixes of all time. The notoriety of its dominance in motorsports is apparent throughout racing history. Its sound is unmistakable, and this platform has the potential to make good power when set up for natural aspiration or forced induction. This engine also has quite a lot of parts on the market, and transforming this particular engine into a high-performance setup is always a cool sight to see in almost any chassis. Unfortunately, I just didn't feel right putting this Japanese engine into this German frame. As cool as the idea seems, I feel it just didn't fit the theme as much as I wanted it to. Now, circling back to BMW engines, slapping a turbo on the stock M54 inline 6 or a similar inline 6 could be a viable option, as there are a number of well-designed engines from the myriad of BMWs produced over the years. There are quite a few engines within this list that have serious potential to turn heads, but I wanted something just a bit more unique without setting my wallet completely on fire. It would be neat to get my hands on an old race engine or a high compression race ready M54, as these sound incredible at high RPM, but I feel like this introduced too many challenges with maintenance and reliability down the line. The last engines left on this list was the well-known LS platform. We all know this engine from the thousands of swaps we've seen over the years and its prevalence in media across the internet. From drifting to drag racing, this engine is in nearly every corner of the automotive and motorsports scene. With plenty of parts to choose from and high potential to make power, this platform is touted for its reliability on the street and in competition. Now I know what you're going to say, an LS isn't very unique. I know this, and I'm aware that an LS has been swapped in almost every vehicle or machine possible. Every now and then, I am still surprised about what I see in my Instagram feed. While this has been done many times before in a BMW chassis, the popularity of this swap makes things a bit easier, as there's quite a lot of swap parts and knowledge available online from the many people that have gone down this road. Now, this engine doesn't have a red line nearly as high as the rest of the platforms on the list, but this can definitely be addressed later down the line. So after going through our list of engine options, I landed on the LS. All of the engines on the list were great choices to make this car more responsive and exciting on the street, but I felt with the LS platform I could reliably make more power in a naturally aspirated form, as opposed to the other engines where if I were to try and make the same power in an NA setup, I would be introducing way too many expensive parts, much more maintenance, and race fuel, which is honestly a no-go for me in any street car scenario. Now I was tasked with building an engine within this platform to meet my criteria. When the project started, I wanted something high revving, aggressive sounding, and naturally aspirated. This car was never supposed to be some monster on the track or set records of any kind, but it was going to be a car built with more than enough power to throw around and drive fast. The LS in this instance ticks all the boxes except for its red line. Chasing a high rev limit above stock specifications can get expensive very quickly in almost any situation. The goal was to try and build this engine to rev up to 8,000 RPM. I may set a limiter just shy of this, but I wanted to be well over 7,000 as this is where some nice aftermarket heads and headers really start to sound good. First thing to address was getting a block and some cylinder heads. I started off with a dart block and a Cali's rotating assembly sourced from CNC Competition Products. I would have liked to assemble the engine myself, but as I don't have enough measuring tools or proper space, I left the short block assembly and balancing to dart. A stock rotating assembly could have very well easily held the power I was shooting for, but I had worries about the longevity and reliability of revving higher with the stock crank, rods, and pistons. The extra forces involved in revving to and past 7,500 RPM weren't the only concern, but with these increased piston speeds, this was something I didn't want to worry about down the line. I could have gotten away with a stock bottom end, but I wanted to cover all my bases first. In the next video, I'll be focusing on the engine, the internals, and the accessories to go along with the swap. I'll also touch on the topic of drivetrain and the changes that will be made to accommodate for this increase in torque. Thank you for watching. See you next time.